Hey everybody, and welcome back to another book review. I know it's been a couple weeks, and that was unintended, but our little tugboat, he arrived several weeks ago, about 2 weeks before he was supposed to. So we have been dealing with all of that, adjusting to life. But it's nice because I'm home a little bit more, and I'm trying to catch up on some reading while he sleeps. And also recording videos while he sleeps. So here we are. Hi. So he is asleep downstairs with his dad for lunch right now. But yeah, books. So this book, I actually ran across this book when Cheshire and I were at a reenactment in Ohio. It was at a historic site, a historic fort, and in their gift shop, they had tons and tons of books, which I always love when a gift shop is really just a bookshop. And so I didn't buy anything. I was proud of myself, but I did go through their bookshelves and I documented some books that I thought would be very interesting and really wanted to read. And so this one caught my attention, and it is called The Vice President's Black Wife. And it is by Amrita Meyers, who is a professor, I believe, at Indiana University, IU. And if she's not, she was fairly recently. This is a very, very recent book. So this book caught my attention, obviously, because as far as I was aware, there were no vice presidents with black wives. So I was just like, what is this? What is this book? And it was very eye-opening, and it was also just a really good read for me from a interpretative perspective. As many of you guys know, that I do historic interpretation in my off time when I'm not teaching or doing other things. And the periods that I primarily focus on are 1800 to 1870, roughly. That's just kind of my niche little area of knowledge. And this book takes place in the 1830s, which is where I spend the vast majority of my interpretative time. And so I was just sitting there as I was reading, and I was like, this is information we would know. And so I kept texting all of my coworkers. I was like, yo, have you guys read this book? And so like now I'm trying to get everybody else to read it because it was so informative for the period. And also just information that we probably would know, especially here in Indiana, in the 1830s. So this particular story is very, I wouldn't say 100% rare, but it is a rare story. And it is about a lady named Julia Chin, who was the wife of the vice president to Martin Van Buren, who was a Johnson. And I keep cracking up at how many Johnsons we've had as vice presidents. Luckily, Martin Van Buren was not assassinated. But you know, it's just interesting how many Johnsons we have had as vice presidents. But she was described in a lot of different ways, but she was mostly described as a lighter skinned black woman who was enslaved. And she was enslaved to the Johnson family. And at some point, she and Mr. Johnson started a relationship. And this all takes place in Kentucky, just not too far from the capital of Kentucky, Frankfort. So in this time, they have this relationship, and he sires two daughters with her as well. And they are light enough that they can pass as white, which both daughters do eventually pass as white, and eventually get married to two local white men. And all of them at some point own other people, whether that be family or just other enslaved folks. But in all of this time that they are together, he very frequently refers to her as his partner, his wife, his, confidant. She's never referred to really as his enslaved workers. So it's one of the few, very, very few times that a white man acknowledges that he has children by a black woman, specifically by an enslaved black woman. I think there's a lot of nuance with this story, especially with the Chin family. For one, her other relatives are all enslaved and working for the family as well. And several times try to run away, try to make it on their own, which just speaks to this was not a perfect, like, hey, my family member is in this elevated position and now I get something out of it. It wasn't necessarily like that. But it is just very interesting that a white man in the early 1800s would like to, or would be open to acknowledging that he has had a relationship. As far as evidence goes, there's not a ton of evidence about Julia Chin or the relationships that she had with the various members of the Johnson family. And there's not a ton of descriptions about them as well, mostly because Richard Johnson, his brothers, after he passed away, destroyed as much as possible. There is just not a lot. There's some written records, diaries, letters, things like that, but the vast majority of things got destroyed. And obviously to hide that this happened. Because most white men in this period, if they are having relationships with anyone who is of color, they are not talking about it out in the open. And he is one of the very few people that does talk about it out in the open. And there's newspaper articles, there's other letters from other people in the area that also talk about this relationship out in the open and refer to her as a black woman, a negress, a mulatto, like all the stereotypical words that you think of for that period. She's been called all of them. And that is also challenging because we have no real perfect description of her. So we don't know what she looked like entirety. But she obviously had to be light enough to have children who could pass. So yeah, overall, very, very interesting story. Loved interesting. I love a good, interesting historic story. Loved learning about that area in Kentucky, which is not too terrible far from obviously Indiana. And what information was being passed around in the newspapers, especially as we get to the presidency of Martin Van Buren and he's running for office. And Richard Johnson, his work with Congress and everything and how this information affected him. It was just very interesting to kind of hear another perspective. And again, it's a rare perspective because we don't hear about these types of relationships. We also don't know much about their actual relationship. It could have been coercive. It could have been a love match. We just don't know. Which is something that is also challenging to kind of decipher with very minimal records. But all of that to say, even though I loved it, I did really struggle reading this one. The author, the professor, she is very repetitive and repeats a lot of the same sections or the same phrases, sometimes even just 2 or 3 paragraphs later. And it would be something as simple as, she was a woman of color. And she keeps saying that she was a woman of color, but it's at inopportune moments. Like we've already established that she's a woman of color by the book title. So we don't need to have the extra reminder constantly. They also talk about the Johnson family also ran a academy for the indigenous folks in the area called Choctaw Academy, and it was not a great place. Just saying that overall, as we know, a lot of the educational institutions that were designed for indigenous populations were just not great places, and this was no different. But because of that, she, repeats like, and the boys were never the same, or They always were just kind of there. It was never fully developed. And I think that's two kind of separate stories. Like, yes, they do work together, but they're also kind of separate at the same time. So there was a lot of that. And then, of course, because there is such a lack of information, there was a lot of just kind of guesswork, which is always just kind of challenging to kind of work around. So she had to have a lot of filler from other sources, other stories of people who were in mixed race relationships, many of which were not reciprocal mixed race relationships. So yeah, like overall, really enjoyed learning because I do love a good learning experience, but I just really struggled with her writing style. I think the book could have been probably a good 30 to 40 pages shorter if she wasn't repeating sections over and over and over again. And they just weren't sections that necessarily needed to be repeated constantly. So yeah, because of that, I give it a 3, 2 or 3. It's just not the best for me in terms of historic books that I've read, but informationally really great. Just gave me a lot to think about, and then things, I think I've mentioned before, I've been diving down. I dive down random research rabbit holes, but I've been diving down a research rabbit hole about mixed race relationships on kind of more of the frontier side, which this area, Indiana, Kentucky, would still kind of be considered a little bit more frontier-ish in the early part of the 19th century. And because I'm in a mixed race relationship, it's very important for me to make sure that I understand like what that looks like, especially as we are out interpreting. So that it's not just like, hey, this guy owns me and I'm his slave. It's not that. And so trying to find information about relationships that were not just coercive enslavement situations is really, really challenging. So this just kind of popped up because of the research that I've been doing. So yeah, there you have it. Vice President's Black Wife, really good story, hidden story that, is really, to me, is really important that we're bringing to the forefront in historic research. So there you have it. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being patient through all of this. Like, comment, share, subscribe if you so choose. And I will see you in the next book review. Bye.